Hello, you're through the books, boys. You've got Dean on the line. Who's calling?
Hi, this is Jay Lee.
Hey, that's an amazing coincidence. We were just talking about your book, The Deadly Deal. So thank you so much for calling in. How are you?
Oh, thanks for taking the call. I'm doing really well. How are you today?
I'm good. I was just telling my co-host Alex all about The Deadly Deal. I loved the book, I have to say. I'm a fan of thrillers. I'm a fan of that kind of little bit of action, a little bit of detective type vibe. It's something I've always liked. Even as a teenager, I was always reading those type of books. So lately, I've been on a lot of classic lit, and it's refreshing to kind of go back to the stuff that's just fun for me.
No, I really appreciate you saying that. I'm glad you liked it. It's been a lot of fun to write, and it's kind of been in a lot of ways it's my writing first book. So it's really cool to see it and to hear you say that you enjoyed it. Thanks a lot. I really appreciate that.
Good stuff. Now you say you have other books, right? You've written a couple of books before this.
Yeah, that's right. So this will actually be my third published book. The first book I wrote was called The Hubley Case, and that came out in 2018. And then I wrote a book called The Silent Cardinal, and that came out in 2021. But this book, The Deadly Deal, the sort of the fun nostalgic aspect of it for me was I wrote the first draft about 17 years ago.
Wow, right.
Yeah, I was working in an industry that was tangential to the pharmaceutical industry, and I had this thought, and I sort of put this book together, and at that time had actually obtained a literary agent, and we were about 3 weeks away from submission when, unfortunately, he called me up and he told me that he had been diagnosed with terminal cancer,
Oh,
and I said, Jay, I really appreciate you being willing to do this, but I think you need to focus on some other things.
yeah.
And he subsequently passed away. And when that happened, I kind of put the book in the drawer,
Hmm.
and life marched on, right? And two other books came and got married, had some kids, and all that good stuff. But as I was looking at it, relatively recently, I couldn't shake it. I really liked the premise,
Hmm.
and so it started out with me saying, "All right, well, I'll make it current. Things have changed over 17 years, but I'll make a few minor tweaks." It didn't work out that way. I wound up doing
Rewrote the whole
essentially
thing,
a
did you?
complete rewrite of the entire book, including the title. But to see the book, this close to publication and see it in its quote final form, it kind of tugs at the heartstrings a little bit because this was really my first real book, even though it's
Hmm.
the third one being published. So long answer to a short question.
So this is the special one. Like this is the original one that took nearly 2 decades to actually come out, and you finally got it out.
Yeah, and it's really neat to see that and to kind of think back to think about yourself. What were you doing 17 years ago? And if what you were doing 17 years ago is suddenly now going to get its final form and get published, and it's nostalgic. There's no way around it. There's some emotion with this one that simply didn't exist with the first two.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And is that a full circle journey? Like, or do you still have more plans? Like, are you working on another book already?
Oh yeah. I've got a couple of different storylines in the works right now. I've had quite a few. I mean, that's relative, right? But by my estimation, I've had quite a few fans of the Seabird series. The first two books were a
Hmm.
series.
Right.
They've asked, is there going to be another one? So I'm kind of toying with that idea. And then I have another standalone concept that I've been playing around with. So writing is a passion. It's something that I just love to do. And the fact that I get the opportunity to publish it and kind of go down this road is very rewarding. But the real enjoyment of it is just the act of sitting down and putting ideas on a paper. So I believe that I will do that until I'm not here anymore, no matter
Mm.
what capacity it is, because for me, it's just a really fun way to spend some time.
Cool. So to give the quick kind of recap, we have their main character, David Centrelli. He discovers this big conspiracy relating to the a drug that's being developed to cure diabetes. Essentially, it's not really safe. That's without giving too many spoilers. The drug isn't safe, but they want to release it anyway. That sounds pretty realistic to me. Like how realistic do you think? How scarily realistic do you think the story is?
Yeah, I mean, I will say that I find it to be frighteningly realistic, because what it really centers around is there are a few institutions and people that could benefit very much from a scenario where any kind of a drug would get launched when it's not ready. And if they happen to be in the right place and they happen to work together, based on the way the FDA approval process works, and based on the links between the government, the insurance, the pharmaceutical companies, it struck me as a very believable scenario. Now, I mean, the truth of the matter is, you would hope that there would not be people out there who would be so selfish. And the villains in this book are clearly putting their own interests ahead of everyone else, and risking a lot of lives to line their pockets.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, we do see that there are people like that out in the real world. So it's research from the standpoint of the approval process and the interconnectedness. It certainly is not based on anything that has happened. It's not based on any kind of a true story. But certainly, when I write thrillers and suspense novels, I want there to be that element of believability. And based on the research that I did, there certainly is an aspect of that to this idea.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I felt when I was reading it. I thought, okay, obviously it's fiction, and obviously it's a thriller, so we end up with kind of the FBI, and they wonder how high does this go? Could it go to the president and all that kind of stuff? And I thought, okay, that bit, fair enough, that's fiction. But in terms of the actual idea, I thought, yeah, I could see that happening. Like I could definitely see it happening.
Yeah. I mean, and if one of the things that happens as a result of a handful of people reading this is people start thinking about that and talking about that and saying, well, how could we make sure that it doesn't happen? What a rewarding outcome that would be, right? Sure. That wasn't what was in my mind when I was writing the book, obviously, but I think that some of my most adored authors in this genre, they have written stories that are based on facts and data that do make them strikingly realistic. And
yeah,
those are really, to me, that should be an objective of a thriller writer. You don't want to put this isn't science fiction, right? You do want there to be an element of realism to your plot line. And so I'm really appreciate you saying that. I'm glad to hear that you felt that as you read the book, that was kind of one of the things that you had in your head.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm also a sucker for romance, so part of my investment was like, what is anything going to happen with Anne and David? And it's not really, it's not laid on very thick throughout the book. That was never their intention or anything like that. But I'm always just kind of thinking, okay, maybe something's going to happen with them, because that always kind of gets me. But what I'm also interested in is the brother relationship. So again, without spoiling too much, at some point, David's brother Doug gets involved, and they haven't spoken in a long time. Even though they appear, in a few scenes together later in the book, there's not that part where they catch up or they have their brotherly chat or they say, oh, everything's kind of okay. Was that like deliberate to almost keep them apart, even though they're physically together?
Most certainly it was. And the reason for that was twofold. Number one, the circumstances under which they're brought back together, they simply don't have time to have the catch up chat, right? Because they're running from people who are trying to hurt them. And, without spoiling too much, there's, the bad guys are trying to leverage the brother to get David to do something for them. So the circumstances don't really warrant it. It didn't strike me as realistic that they would sit down and just sort of like catch up. But the primary reason why they don't do that is because it really speaks to the evolution of David's character. So I really wanted David to be a relatable person. In my previous two books, the protagonist, his name is Ben Siebert. Hopefully people find him likable, but he's a former Marine Special Forces trained person. He's been equipped with the tools to be able to escape these types of dangerous situations. He's not what I would call an everyday Joe. And so when I created the David character, I wanted him to be very relatable. And one of the ways that he's relatable is his initial personality when you first meet him is he's a little hardened by some of the things that happened in his past and some of the things that involved his brother. And so a part of the evolution of the book is the evolution of David's character, where he has to learn to trust someone. And that's where Anne comes in. He has to learn to forgive someone. And that's where his brother comes in. But that doesn't necessarily happen within 1 or 2 days of reuniting with someone that you haven't seen in that long. So I wanted to touch on that character evolution and make it realistic, but I also didn't want to make it sappy or disingenuine or unauthentic. And so what I tried to do is I tried to show throughout the book's conclusion that David's character has evolved and he has learned to do those things, but it wouldn't have really fit the storyline for him to be doing it real time while they're dodging bullets and chasing cars and stuff like that.
Yeah, so, fair.
But yeah, you're absolutely right. That was you're very insightful. I actually had a chapter that I wound up removing that basically had those two kind of hash it out and come to an understanding that I wound up removing because it didn't feel authentic to what was going on around them.
Fair. And spoiler for something that doesn't happen, but yeah, even in the epilogue or something, we don't get the kind of they're sitting, having a beer together or something. It's just not there,
That's right. And I honestly I think that one of the I've had a lot of early readers tell me that without spoiling too much that that was one of the things they were kind of hoping they were going to see. But the truth is, I don't know how realistic that is. I don't know that you would all of a sudden become best friends, even if you can reach a point of congeniality. That doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be best friends. So I wanted that to be as realistic as possible, and I know that at least to some of the early readers that left a little bittersweet taste in their mouth. But I found it to be authentic.
Yeah, I think you're definitely right. And you're right to say, he starts out hardened. He'd had some issues with his brother, with his dad, with his ex, Tiffany, a lot of things that had just, hardened him a little bit. And yeah, he opens up to Anne, but you're right to say he's not going to become best friends with Doug because he had a good friend, Jake, who dies early in the novel. So, he's not necessarily looking to just replace him either, And of course, part of the story then is that he realizes Jake's death maybe isn't so out of nowhere or so coincidental, and lots of things might be tied together. He speaks to Dr. Malik, he gives him some clues, and off he goes on his adventure. So it would have been a bit, it's a very stressful adventure as well. So it would have been a bit disingenuous to suddenly say, like, okay, we're all friends, let's have a chat. And
yeah, no, I appreciate you kind of verifying, because that was clear. That was definitely what was in my head as I was trying to figure out how do we tie this up towards the end. And I think one of the things that I enjoyed writing about that character is to maybe put a little, without trying to preach, put a little bit of like, yeah, you know what, sometimes we do need to move past difficult things in life, and sometimes we do need to learn to trust other people. And he at the start of the book, he's very unwilling to do that. He's sort of holding on to the tension from years before. And so I really enjoyed trying to create the scenarios that would make a person kind of realize, like, you're only hurting yourself by boxing yourself in. And
Yeah.
I'm glad to hear that you kind of sense that as you read the book as well.
And it's good as well because, as you say, he's an everyman in the sense that, he doesn't suddenly become an action hero. He's scared throughout the book, and he's kind of hiding, and he's thinking like, oh, how am I gonna what have I gotten myself into, and why? And he's trying to do the right thing. He kind of has a noble heart underneath his slightly tough exterior at times, and he's trying to do the right thing, but he doesn't suddenly go into, die hard mode and start kicking ass. He's like, I'm kind of scared, and I kind of somewhat regret getting involved in all this, which is good.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's your comments are so insightful, because that was actually one of the hardest parts about writing. One of the most enjoyable and the hardest parts was making him an everyday man, because you have to create these scenarios where these people who are trained to kill other people are how is he going to avoid that from happening? What is this everyday guy who doesn't even, know what a gun is? How is he supposed to survive against people who are trained to do this in a way that doesn't feel corny or unrealistic? But even though he manages to escape, one death scenario after another, at the end of it, he is not Bruce Willis in Die Hard.
No.
He is very much scared throughout the entire book. And one of the things that I really enjoyed is that sort of at the climax, he has to decide, am I going to put all these people ahead of myself, or am I going to watch out for number one? And I think that was a really fun evolution of his character to write, and hopefully it was to read as well.
Mm-hmm. And I know that you came back to the book after a long time. Was it something that you particularly wanted to do, to cover this like big pharma conspiracy type thing, or did it just happen to be that was the book that you'd written and you came back to it? Did you particularly want to talk about that issue?
Yeah, I just always been intrigued by the idea. I mean, there was no specific thing about this time that made me say, okay, after 17 years, let's give it a look. I knew that I wanted to take a break from the series, from the Ben Siebert series. I knew that I wanted to try something fresh. And the more I thought about it, that idea kept just playing in my head. I've always found that to be a compelling idea, because it does feel realistic. And I worked in an industry where I got exposed to it enough to know that it was realistic.
Mm-hmm.
And so it wasn't that there was some impetus that was happening in this time that suddenly made me say, let's yank it back or whatever. But it was very much wanting to do something fresh and really, really liking the plot line. And I ripped it to shreds, and my wife reads every page that I write, and she rips it to shreds and makes it better. She's a better writer than I am. She really is. But this central plot line, the idea, really didn't change. And that was kind of like, it's always been something that I've thought, oh, that's an intriguing idea. And that's really what prompted me to say, well, I wonder what it would look like if I took a look at that manuscript. And a lot changes over 17 years. Car models go obsolete, and processes change within the FDA, and a couple of other things. The proliferation of social media and cell phone technology that wasn't around back then. So there were definite, substantive changes, and that wound to basically rewriting the whole book, but still keeping that central theme that I liked so much.
Fantastic. Before I ask you the last question that we ask everyone, would you like to, tell people where they can get the book, or plug your website or something like that?
Yeah, I would really love the opportunity to have people check it out if they think it might be interesting. The easiest way, the most direct way to get to the book, if you want to learn more about the book, or you want to learn more about me or the other books, is to go to my website, which is www.jleethrillers, all one word.com. And on that website, you'll find, ways to read about the book. There's some excerpts of the book if you want to see if it's your cup of tea or not. You can learn a little bit more about the other books. And then if you feel so inclined, certainly there's a way for you to purchase it through a number of retailers. But I would also ask that, if anybody out there listening would like to connect, please go to the website and shoot me a note. I would love to hear what your thoughts are, and all of the means that you would need to do that, whether it's, read more about the books, read more about me or whatever, you can get at www.jleethrillers.com. And I hope you do. I would love to hear from you.
Cool. Fantastic. And I'll put a link in the show notes as well, as always. So that leads us to our final question that we like to surprise everyone with. If there's one existing book that you wish you'd been the person to write, what would it be?
Ooh, existing book. So any book that's been published ever, or
ever.
Like a book that has been published recently?
No, ever. Go as far back as you like.
Ever. Oh, wow. I would say probably a young adult book called Heart of a Champion. It's the story of two 12-year-old boys playing the game of baseball, and some of the things that can happen as a child moves into adolescence and falls into various traps, and tells the story about how these two guys went different routes. And it's such a central theme to a lot of people that I've met throughout my life. And it's such an influencer. It was a successful book, but it was not off the charts. But everyone that I've known who has read it, particularly if they read it as a teenager, it's had a lasting impact. And the idea that you could write a book for kids that would have a lasting impact on their lives, I find that very compelling, very interesting indeed. So that's how I would answer that one on the spot. How about you?
Oh,
I'm gonna
wow.
ask you the same question.
Almost 3 years in, no one's actually ever asked me back before. I think I'm a massive Dickens fan, so I think I would have to go for just Oliver Twist or David Copperfield, something like that. I love that type of story, very character based. So I think something like that, very old England based. Yeah. Well,
it's funny as I think about it. There's so many other books that come to mind. And well, that's the one I went with. So
yeah, it's always like to get you on the spot. Thank you so much for calling in. We love the book, and it was a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you so much for your time. Thanks for taking the call. I really appreciate it. You have a wonderful rest of the day.
You too. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.